You can have a seat. Hi, my name is Cameron. I'm one of the pastors here at Crosspoint. I haven't been up here for a little while, so some of you have seen. My wife had a girl, baby, 5 weeks ago now, so we weren't sure when everything was going to happen, so I just took some time off of preaching. So if anything comes out sounding a little weird, just chalk it up to sleep deprivation, or if I nod off, just someone yell, throw something at me, whatever you need to do. All right, this morning I want to talk to you a little bit about hunger. Have you ever been really hungry? The time that I think of that is probably the most hungry, I was with one of my friends, his name's Pedro. I feel like anytime I say I was with my friend Pedro, there's something bad happened afterwards. He's one of, those friends, I'm sure you all have them too. And a couple other people, we were probably like 18, 19 years old, and we decided it was time to become men. Okay, that's a thing you just get to decide one day. Like, I'm going to do a man test. So we decided, we're going to go out in the woods for like 3 days and just like live off the land. We're not going to bring a tent. We're not going to bring like anything with us. No food. Like, we'll forage for berries. A friend had a BB gun, so it's like, I'm sure we'll find something to eat. I didn't grow up in Wisconsin, so I didn't know all about hunting and all of that stuff. We're just like, I'm sure we'll figure it out. So I grew up in Oregon, so you could just drive like an hour. Kind of like find a patch of woods that there's like no one around for miles and miles. So we just kind of went out there, hiked for a while, stopped, like, okay, this is where we're going to live for the next 3 days. This is like our journey into manhood. And it was great for the first half a day probably. And we're like, you know what, maybe we should have brought some food with us just in case. I was like, no, don't be negative. Like, we got this. So we went out hunting. The entire time we killed one squirrel. So we heard our friend shoot. We're like, oh, maybe he's got something. He comes back holding a squirrel. And at that point, we're so hungry. We're like, yes, this is awesome. We didn't know how to skin an animal or anything. So we're like trying, and there's fleas jumping off of it. But at this point, it is the most appetizing thing I can imagine. We get it finally all ready to go. We're cooking it over the fire. And I realized that squirrels look a lot bigger than they actually are when they're furry. Once you get all the fur out, it was not very much meat. So we cut it into 4 pieces. We're just sitting there gnawing on our little tiny bit of squirrel. And we ended up, the hunger got so bad, we're like, we can't go back. We told everyone we were going to do this. We're going to have to face the shame of all the people who said, you're idiots, you shouldn't do this. But the hunger got so bad, on the second day, we finally okay, this is stupid, we're going to go back home. Hunger has a great power over our life. Some of you probably know the word hangry. Right, a matchup of hunger and angry. Some of you, who experiences hangriness, really strongly? Yeah, you probably have to apologize to people after you eat lunch. I am really sorry. I don't know what came over me. Hunger can make us do things that we don't want to do. Hunger for food or for water in certain parts of the world can even cause people to kill each other to get what they feel like they need to survive. Hunger, a desire to get our needs met, is often why people get divorced, right? Because, this person wasn't meeting my needs, so I'm going to try to find someone who will meet my needs better, get me what I need. This hunger and desire for more and for what we need is what's behind a lot of the, over the last couple of years, the unfair treatment of say workers in Amazon warehouses, right? This desire to make more money and have more can cause us to do negative things that affect other people. Hunger has power. So we're going to look at this next line of the Lord's Prayer that kind of addresses this need to get our needs met. But before we do that, I want to tell you a story. And this is a story that the people Jesus was talking to would have been intimately familiar with. Okay, so just to kind of catch us up to speed, because we're not, most of us aren't Jewish. We didn't grow up in a Jewish world. And so let me get you caught up to speed with this story that Jesus's original listeners and readers of Matthew's gospel would have been intimately familiar with. So this is a story from the Old Testament, way back. This is all from the book of Genesis, this first part. God went to a guy named Abraham, and he said, I'm going to make a great nation out of you, and I'm going to give you this great land, this promised land. And back then, the promised land, a great piece of land to live in was not about like, what the view was like, access to like good schools or any of those kinds of things. It was primarily about how well the land produced food. Right? Because back in that time, especially in that part of the world, food was a lot more scarce than it is now. And so there's always a need to get food and make sure like you had good land for farming and good land for animals and all of those kinds of things. So this promised land, this first promise in the Bible, way back in the book of Genesis, is about food and about hunger. And it's called the land flowing with milk and honey. This is a spot where there's all sorts of good food coming out of. Now, eventually, if you keep reading through the story, there's a point where there is no food, something called a famine, where people are starving and they need food. And if you've read this story, this guy Joseph, who is one of the brothers of Abraham's descendants, he gets sold into slavery in Egypt. He ends up like rising the ranks. And God lets him in on, hey, the fact that there's going to be a famine, there's going to be a shortage of food. So Joseph helps Egypt like store up all this food. And so then when the Israelite nation, like God's chosen people, Abraham's descendants, when they need food, they now have a place to go that God has provided through Egypt. So they go from the promised land, they go over to Egypt, they get the food they need, they stay there for a while. As the time goes on, eventually the pharaohs, like the kings of Egypt, kind of forget about all the good that Joseph did as the generations go on. And so eventually they're kind of like, what are we doing with all these Israelite people here? Why do we like let them just live here in such like luxurious living? Like let's get some work out of them. So they turn them into slaves to make bricks. This is like hundreds of years later. Then we get to the book of Exodus, okay? And in the book of Exodus, we learn that all this is happening and God has decided now to bring his people out of Egypt and back into this land that he had promised them. And he uses a guy named Moses to do this. So you've maybe heard of Moses. He's like, let my people go. That's from this whole story. God works all sorts of miracles, ends up the people get released from Egypt. They go to the Red Sea and they're standing there and God parts the waters and they cross on dry land. And then the Egyptian army follows in after them and God brings the waters back in and crashes all over them. So God like miraculously in this crazy way saves his people and is going to lead them into this new land that he had promised them, this old land that he had promised them, but would be new for them. So they get out of Egypt, and here is, they get across the Red Sea, they're in the desert, and here is what happens next. This is Exodus 16, verses 2 through 5. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into the desert to starve this entire assembly to death. So they're getting hangry. They're like getting mad at Moses. They're like, it'd be better if we were just dead. At least in Egypt we had food we could have died with. Here we're going to die starving. Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. And this way, I will test them and see whether they follow my instructions. So God would like give them bread each day, and anything they saved until the next day would go bad. So he's kind of like testing them to be like, follow my instructions. On the sixth day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. Because on the seventh day was the Sabbath day, the day of rest. And so God would allow this bread from heaven, this manna, to be okay for that seventh day so that they could eat it and not have to gather it on the day of rest. So here is what happens in this story is God is raining down bread from heaven in response to their grumbling and their complaining. And one of the things I love about this story is that God doesn't just let them like store it all up in all their baskets and all the things they have. And what it does is it forces them to need to every single day, every night when they go to bed and every morning when they wake up, trust that God is actually going to provide for them that day. Right? They can't just like work extra hard, gather up enough for like 3 years and be like, cool, I'm good. I don't have to worry about whether God's going to provide for me or not. Like I got it under control. Every day they are forced to wake up and decide, okay, God, are you going to be there? They need to learn to trust him. Like in the desert, God is teaching them how to trust him and rely on him for their needs instead of themselves or someone else. They have to daily trust that God is going to provide more bread for that day. Now, the disciples, so fast forward like thousands of years, where Jesus is talking, there's like these disciples, these people who are following him, who he had called from whatever it is that they were doing before. They're starting to follow him. There's like crowds gathering in this like where he's gonna like teach about prayer. The disciples in a lot of ways are living in this same kind of story, okay? Has anyone ever seen the show, The Chosen? A few people. I kind of resisted it because I feel like sometimes Christian things are a little cheesy, like TV and shows. But Dave kept talking about it, I heard other people talk about it. It's actually really good. But one of the things I love that it kind of brings to light that you don't really see when we just like read little parts of the Bible or kind of like read through the Bible fast is these people, these disciples who were following Jesus, they had like whole lives that they were living before Jesus came and called them, right? They were fishermen, they were tax collectors, they had jobs, and to follow Jesus, they had to leave behind these things that they had been doing all of their life and providing for themselves. So I imagine as Jesus is like sharing this prayer, his disciples are like kind of in this world where like, we just said yes to following this guy. I really hope we're gonna have enough food to eat. I hope we're gonna have like a place to live. Like I hope we're going to be okay. So the disciples are feeling this probably individually, but also like the whole nation of Israel is kind of like feeling this, like they're under Roman occupation and things aren't really going the way they thought they should or the way they thought God told them things were gonna go. So like, I don't know, is God like even there to take care of us? Like we can't like run our nation the way we want to. Like is God even there providing for us? And they're asking a lot of the questions I imagine that we're also asking today. Right, in our world where gas prices are crazy high and food prices are crazy high and inflation is really high, like all these things happening in our world, I hear lots of people asking the question like, I don't know what's gonna happen. Like, I don't know if we'll be able to afford food. I don't know if I have to find a second job in order to provide for my family. Like, is God gonna provide if I take this big risk that God might be asking me to do? Is he gonna be there for me? Will I have enough food? Will I have enough to retire? Will I have enough to provide for me or my family? Will I be taken care of? Is all of this actually going to work out? And it's in this context of people who are worried about like what's going to happen that God or that Jesus provides this prayer. They say, teach us how to pray. He says, okay, here's how to pray. And this line, I think, speaks directly to that. So here's the whole prayer so far that we've read. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, which we've heard about the last couple of weeks. Give us today our daily bread. That's what we're gonna talk about today. Give us today our daily bread. I think there's a couple things to note here that I wanna highlight. Number one, this comes like after more God-focused prayer. Okay, so like they just prayed to God the Father, like in heaven, hallowed be your name. This comes after praying about God's kingdom. Then Jesus says we pray for our needs and our desires. And I think this is really important because a lot of times we come to God first with our needs. Actually, a lot of times, at least what I do, is I like rush in, tell God my big list of needs that I have, and then I kind of run out of time, and so I rush out. So the way Jesus is inviting us to pray actually helps us to discipline ourselves to be focused on God and his kingdom and things outside of ourselves first before we get to our needs. And what I have found is in praying this way, like kind of praying through this prayer, stopping at each phrase and like spending time on each one, that oftentimes by the time I get to this line, give us today our daily bread, my prayer for what I need looks very different once I've centered myself on God and his kingdom than it would have looked had I just started and ended with that. Does that make sense? Like God reframes and refocuses our heart and our attention when we pray and connect to him first and foremost. Secondly, Jesus tells us to pray for our daily bread. Right, and this like kind of echoes this whole story of manna in the wilderness. Jesus doesn't say, hey, pray for what you need for the next year and God will provide. He doesn't say, hey, ask God, like Jesus knew he was gonna be on earth for 3 years going around doing his ministry thing. Jesus doesn't like wait till he's saved up 3 years of finances before he starts his journey. Like no, he relies on God daily, just like the Israelites in the desert had to rely on God every single day for what they needed. Not for the week, not for the month, not for the year, but for that day, right? That's a huge shift from the way we like to live our lives in this world right now. Right, we want to prepare for the month. We want to prepare for the year. We want to prepare for, I'm like, 34 now. And I have been being told for 20 years, you need to prepare for what happens when you're 70 years old, right? Which is true. There's some good wisdom in that. I'm not against retirement or any of those kinds of things. But it's so interesting that our culture puts so much focus on preparing for what's next, preparing for the next stage of life, the next thing that's going to happen. And yet Jesus says that we need to look to God to meet our needs today, right? Our daily bread. Every day coming back to him and asking for what we need today. And then tomorrow asking for what I need tomorrow. And the next, yes, I feel like I'm just repeating myself. And lastly, there's an assumption that God is the one we trust and look to for our provision, right? That ultimately everything comes from God. Even like the rain comes from God. The earth's ability to make food comes from God. Our ability to work, our ability to create things, our ability to make money and to buy food and go to the grocery store. All of this ultimately comes from God. It's not something we just make happen on our own. This is an invitation to live a life where we look to God as our provider, even as we're going about the work that we're doing. So I think that this verse is like an invitation and it's a little bit of a challenge for us, okay? Because I think it's one thing, we all know if you've been around church for any length of time, of course I'm supposed to trust God for my needs, but there's a huge difference between like knowing that's the right answer and actually living it out day to day. So first, I think this is an invitation to actually trust that maybe God knows how to meet our needs better than we know how to meet our needs. So like originally, Jesus is talking about bread, give us today our daily bread, as he's talking to the disciples and the other people. And this is more relevant now than it was a few years ago, right? Where we're worried about like, where's food gonna go? How high is milk gonna get in price? All these kinds of things. But I have a question. What if this verse was about more than just our food and our physical needs for food and water and those things? And as I've been praying this prayer and I've heard other people talk about it, I think that there's more than just provision for food at stake. I think we can widen this verse out, this section of the Lord's Prayer out, to be about trusting God to meet all of our needs that we have. Like what would it look like to trust God to meet your emotional needs or your spiritual needs or your physical needs, like beyond just food? Or your time or your energy needs, right? That's something we're all starved for. Like a lot of us don't feel like we have enough time to do what God has called us to do. Our focus needs, like the mental focus we need to have to do whatever it is God's called us to. Our patience needs, like the list could go on and on and on. We have so many needs in so many ways that we feel probably strapped and starved and like things are scarce. And it's probably a little bit different for me than it is for you, than it is for everyone else in this room. But what if we look to God to meet those needs instead of just trying to meet them all ourselves or assuming it's all up to us to meet those needs? Now, I think that it's very natural when we notice like, man, I'm really struggling here, I'm scarce, or I don't quite have enough, to double down and just try to like make things happen ourselves. So I think it's easy to assume like God doesn't care about the things that we feel like we need in our life. Right, that God, there's so many bigger problems in the world, or I'm just used to doing things myself all the time. It's easy to just kind of assume like, this isn't something I need to bother God with. But I believe this verse is an invitation to bring all of our needs to God and look to him and trust him to meet them and to fill us up for the life that God has called us to do. And I don't think trying to meet these on your own is like necessarily a bad thing, or trying to work towards meeting these needs is a bad thing. Just like it's not a sign of mistrust back in Jesus's day to like bake a loaf of bread because like, I'm not trusting that like God's gonna drop a loaf of bread from the ceiling. Like God works within the natural world and he works within our own effort and he works through like all the things that we also do to live in this world. It's kind of like if I stayed up all night playing video games and then trusted God to give me enough energy and enough focus and enough attention to be at work the next day. I don't think Mac would be very excited about that, right? He's like, what are you doing? You're like falling asleep. Sorry, I was playing video games, but I'm trusting God will provide. Like, no, like there's obviously a cooperation there that needs to happen where we do our part, but we're also ultimately trusting that God is gonna be the one to fill us up. And it's not all up to us to do it. I think there's a huge difference between trusting God, though, and anxiously and fearfully grasping for what we feel like we need. Okay? And sometimes these can even look the same on the outside. I don't know if you've noticed this about the spiritual life. A lot of times things can look kind of the same on the outside, but it's different depending on what's happening in your heart. And I think you probably know the difference between trusting God to meet your needs and outwardly saying you're trusting God, but inwardly you're anxious and you're fearful and you're kind of trying to grab for whatever you can to get what you feel like you need. And a lot of times what I've noticed is when we're living out of that scarcity mindset, that it's all up to me to do this, that it causes us to do really unhealthy things to ourselves and to the people around us. So for me, I would say my biggest struggle when it comes to what things I feel like I need isn't necessarily am I gonna have enough money for food or any of those kinds of things. But I tend to feel like I will not have enough time or energy to do the things that I'm supposed to do or that God has called me to do. And so sometimes what will happen is I will think oh man, I really need to conserve energy, or I really need to say no to so many things. So I make sure I have enough energy. And this is of course made way worse being in having an infant at home who's crying and waking up anywhere between 3 to 18 times in the middle of the night. And so for example, yesterday, right, it was a beautiful day, super nice day. My dad had just left. He had been visiting for 2 weeks, which is super fun. But if you've had company, you're also whew, okay, there's a lot of things that we need to kind of get going. And I really felt for myself, I had this drive of okay, time to get to work. I need to do all these chores. I need to do this. I need to do this. Leaves have fallen. There's all these things I have to do. And then my girls wake up from nap time and they're Dad, can you play with us? And I'm immediately oh gosh, kind of annoyed, which I feel terrible about. But I'm kind of annoyed. I'm I have so much to do. And if I wasn't gonna be doing the things I need to do, I would much rather be taking a nap right now. And I felt God saying no, this is what I want you to do right now. And so there was this moment where I had to be okay, am I gonna trust myself to do the things I need to do? Or am I gonna trust that when God asks me to do something that seems really counterproductive, that maybe he has a better idea of what I need than I do? And so I was okay, yeah, let's play. So we did watercolors, and we played in the leaves, and we did swinging. And at the end of those few hours of playing, I found I was way more rested and rejuvenated and excited about life than had I just taken a nap or powered through getting all the leaves picked up. And it really like struck home to me that a lot of times when I try to like grasp for what I need and hold on to it and like build up walls and kind of create like, okay, like I'm fixing this and I'm doing this myself, that I actually miss out on all the ways that God wants to provide for me. Right, when it's all about me and all that I can do to meet my needs, I miss out on all the ways that God wants to be my provider. Because I'm like leaving all, like the meeting of my needs is kind of like what I can see and what I can imagine, instead of trusting that God, who's bigger than anything I can see or imagine, actually might have a better idea about what I need in the moment than I do. So I think, and this applies to all the different needs we might have, that God might know, like God might be asking you to be generous in some way. And you're feeling like, I don't know if I can do that because I know that, you know, I have like food coming up that I need to buy or this coming up. And there's an invitation to trust that God is actually the provider for us. Maybe it's like when my dad was like, hey, can I come visit? It's kind of like, I don't know if we have the space. It's like, okay, but I feel like this would be a good thing. So trusting God to provide for what we need in that moment. So it's an invitation to trust God as our provider, to look to him instead of ourselves. But I also think this verse is a challenge to be content with what he's given us, right? And contentment is a really hard thing in our culture, I have found, and in our world. But think of it this way. If God really is providing for us and meeting our needs and wants to like give us our daily bread, and we're turning to him and we're living the life he's called us to live, that means what he's given me today is enough for today. Right? There's a challenge to be content with what he's given me today. That what he's given me is actually enough. Even if I don't feel like it's enough, maybe it's actually enough to get through today. Because God is the ultimate provider. So our bottom line for today, this prayer invites you to trust that what God is providing is actually enough. I think, like I said, this is very hard in our culture. It's very hard in human nature. The Israelites struggled with contentment. Okay, so I want to read the next part of their story. Actually comes out of Numbers 11, 4-6. The rabble with them began to crave other food, and again the Israelites started wailing. They're hangry again, and said, if only we had meat to eat. So here they get this miraculous bread coming from heaven every day that God's providing for them. If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna. Right, so there's a challenge here that I think this reveals that we often think we need a whole lot more than we actually need. And what we actually feel like we need is maybe different than what we think that we need, or what God actually knows that we need. He doesn't say, give us today this daily feast. It's give us today our daily bread. And I think a couple of things that have made this worse in our world. One is our world is saturated with advertising and marketing, okay? And advertising is designed to make you feel discontent with your life, right? Because if you're discontent with your life, not all advertising, but a lot of it, if you're discontent with your life, then you can be like, hey, look at this cool product or this place or this thing that's gonna make it all better. There's actually a study done, I won't go into all the details, but it was over 27 countries, 1 million people from 1987 to 1980 to 2011. And what they found in adjusting for all sorts of other factors is that when more money in a country was spent on advertising, overall happiness a year later went down. So the more we get advertised to, statistically, the less happier and content we will be on average. And this study, ended in 2011. This is before even social media, which psychology has shown that when you're comparing yourself to other people, that is a recipe for discontentment and for feeling like you don't have enough or there's something wrong with you. Not to mention social media is designed so that you see someone's highlight of their week or their month or even their year, and you're sitting here on a crappy day and you're like, gosh, my life sucks compared to this. All of these things affect our happiness and our discontentment and our desire for what we feel like we need. Man, if only I had this, or if only I had this, then I would finally be happy. But I think it's bigger than that. It's also in human nature. And I've discovered this through Barbies, okay? So I have 3 girls, one's 4, one's 2.5, the other one's really little. My girls had a couple Barbies, 2, maybe 3, I don't know exactly. A normal amount of Barbies, we'll say. My wife, all growing up, okay, it was a family tradition. Every Christmas, she would get what's called a holiday Barbie. I don't know if anyone knows what this means. But of course, because these were gonna be collectible and worth something, she was actually never allowed to play with them. So he stayed in the box, keep them all nice. And so we moved them from Oregon to Wisconsin and they sat in the attic. And one day my wife was like, you know what? Enough is enough. I never got to play with these. I am not gonna let this continue. And so while I was at work, they got out the holiday Barbies. So this was from 0 to 18. So they went from having 2 to 3 Barbies to having 20 Barbies just overnight. And I come home from work and I'm like, what has happened to my house? I knew this would be crazy when they were preteens, but this is getting crazy. 3 girls, whew. Anyway, I feel very outnumbered. So I've heard we might do an ice fishing night one day of the winter. So that'll be very fun. Get some, man time. All right, so they have all these Barbies. But do you know what I've found? Is that it is still not enough Barbies. They still go, Dad, we need another Barbie for whatever game they're playing, or it's not the right Barbie, right? I don't know if you've probably experienced this if you're a parent or if you remember being a kid. I'm like, there are 15 other Barbies. Just pick one. I want the one she had. This is in human nature that we want what we don't have, that we think we actually need a whole lot more than we need, and we try to grab for what we want. And it feels really silly when we're talking about a kid's playing with Barbies, but we do the exact same thing all the time. Where we look at our life, and 20 years ago, you might have looked at your life and been like, wow, that's super successful. And now you look at your life and say, yeah, I really feel like I just need a little bit more than I have right now. I just need, if I only had this, then I would finally be happy. And so this is like a part of human nature that we misevaluate what our needs and what our wants. And the fact of the matter is when Jesus is praying this prayer, like give us today our daily bread, is that it's an invitation to ask God to meet our needs, not just meet all of our wants and desires. And of course it's okay to ask for those things. There's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, it's probably not right to get mad at God when he doesn't meet our wildest desires, when he is there every day providing for our needs. So this is an invitation to enter the different way of being in the world, like a way centered on the kingdom of God, trusting that God is our provider and that when he invites us to take risks and participate in his kingdom in big ways and do things that feel big and like scary and like a big stretch, to trust that he's going to provide when we say yes to what it is God is calling us to do. And God may not provide for all of your wants, but he does want to give you what you need. And I think prayer is one of the best ways that we can know what it is that we actually need. Because when we go to God in prayer, we can submit those needs to God, or those things we think we need. And God gives us eyes. What I've noticed is, as I've prayed this prayer over the last few years, is that God gives us eyes to see the way he is providing for us right now. He helps reframe our wants and our needs. Like, ooh, Cameron, maybe you're like stretching a little bit about this being such a huge need in your life. And he helps us to be comforted as we're like waiting for God to still provide for the things that we need in our life. So maybe you know like exactly what you need to do after listening to this passage and talking about it. That's great. If not, here's like a little prayer practice you can do. Name with God where you're noticing a scarcity mindset in your life. Is it finances? Is it food? Is it shelter? Is it your car? Is it something like your time or your energy or your patience? Like where are you noticing like, I just don't have enough of this and I need more? Confess your need or your needs to God and your trust in him as your provider. Like confess like, God, I'm gonna trust you to provide for me this week. And then during the week, continue to ask God for provision, guidance, and wisdom when that needs comes up. So instead of just being like, oh, I really need this, and just kind of moving on, like take the time to pause and stop and say, God, I want to trust you to provide for this need. God, I really need your help right now. And then at the end of the week, debrief with God in prayer how it went. Sometimes I've done this and felt like God provided in ways that I might have missed had I not stopped and like looked back and asked him to provide. Sometimes I feel like God didn't provide, and it's okay to sit with God in that space and to be like, God, I really wanted you to come through in this way and I don't feel like you did. Like that's a real relationship with God, not just like kind of bringing our requests, but talking back and forth with him. Or sometimes I feel like God reframes my perspective to maybe see things in a different way. So, sound good? All right, let's stand. We're going to pray the Lord's Prayer together as we go today. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. All right, thanks guys. Enjoy the beautiful day.